everyone, and welcome to the first chapter of the enigmatic Caro-Kann. In this chapter, we are going to learn how to play against the main line, the classical variation against the Caro-Kann. That goes by the move d4, d5, and actually we don't care if he's playing either knight c3 or knight d2, because anyway, we're going to take on e4, and he's going to take back. And here we got one of the most common positions that you will get once you start playing the Caro-Kann. In this position, there is plenty of options to play with the black pieces. Bishop f5 is probably the move that has been played the most. Also, knight e7 is a very decent move, but my recommendation and my favorite line is actually to play the move knight to f6. In my opinion, this is the easiest way to play with the black pieces. It's gonna give us a structure that we are actually gonna be playing in different lines. For instance, we also can play the structures against the 2-knight variation and in some other move orders. And the normal structure that you will get is basically after knight f6 and e take f6. The first thing we have to realize about these structures, of course, we have double pawns, and I know that at first sight some of you might not like that, but actually it's very useful to have these double pawns. They actually are very useful because we can, for instance, use it after castle to defend our key with extra safety. Also, the fact that we have 4 pawns, sometimes we can even start using one of them to gain some space, and our king will not be that weak since already we have 3 pawns, even if we actually are starting to run with one of them. Also, the pawn on f6 controlling very important squares such as g5 or e5, which makes a knight on f3 completely useless, and that actually is the reason why white is usually developing the knight through e2. In general, you will actually have a very safe king, you will have the possibility to attack with your pawn without making your king extremely weak, and another thing that I really love about this position is that it's extremely easy to develop all your pieces. Your bishop will go to d6, you will castle, your rook will go to e8, your knight is usually going to f8, and it's every time very simple, very similar. So let's go a bit into some of the main lines. In this chapter, we're going to check the main line, which actually is the move c3. And the reason for c3 is that white wants to develop the bishop on d3 and the knight on e2. And actually, white cannot play bishop e3 directly because d4 is hanging. Otherwise, they are not able to develop the knight on e2, which, as I said, is important to develop knight to e2, because on f3 is no jumping anywhere, and that is very bad and very passive for the white knight. So after the move c3, of course, you already know the move. We are playing bishop to d6, controlling the diagonal. White idea, as I said before, is to continue with bishop d3, and now we short castle. After this, there is 2 different ways white can try to play. He can try to either castle short or castle long. In general, I'm very happy when my opponent is castling long because they will give us like a very complex position. But as I said, it's very nice to have 4 pawns in the castle because our king will be very safe, and it's quite simple to attack in the queen side for us. So there is 2 main moves in this position, which are either knight e2 or queen c2. By the way, our opponent playing queen c2 doesn't actually mean that he's gonna long castle for sure, but sometimes people is just trying to get information on how we are placing our pawns in our castle. So let's start, for instance, with the move knight e2, which is not played that much as queen c2. Anyway, our plan will remain very similar, and here we're going to start playing the move rook to e8. Just improving our rook, leaving the place on f8 for our knight, and keeping a lot of flexibility for the rest of our pieces. After the move rook e8, we're gonna start checking the move short castle. So here there are different ways you can develop the pieces, and actually one of the things that I like about this line is that there is very little room for, I mean, you can actually do almost whatever you want. If you want to play knight e6 here, it's fine. If you want to play knight d7, it's fine. If you want to play queen c7, it's also fine. You can easily play the line, even if you don't remember exactly which moves I'm going to tell you, because the position is just positionally okay. So this means you can basically doing and improving your pieces slightly. You don't have to care about so many tactical stuff. It's not a poison pawn in the Najdorf or anything like that. You can just slowly improve your pieces, and understanding the way you put the pieces will give you different ways to play the position. But I also have to say that my favorite move in this position is to play bishop to g4. The idea with bishop g4 is multiple. First, we are developing. We are, of course, spinning the knight on e2. We also have the idea sometimes to go back to g6 and get a super funny structure. Actually, they decide to take on g6. We are taking with the h pawn, having these 4 double pawns, but also very strong structure. So, after the move bishop to g4, in general, f3 is one of the most common moves that white is playing, and I love when my opponent play f3, because then I'm simply coming back to h5, and all the dark squares are much more weak, especially when we play queen c7. We're gonna start annoying here, and okay, we don't really care about some knight f4 gaining the pair of bishop. We can just play bishop g6, and after knight g6 and h6, we have a lovely structure that will help us to control all the dark squares. We can continue with ideas like queen c7, knight d7, f5, knight f6, and our position is super solid. We have no weaknesses, and all of our pieces are placed in a very, very simple way. So f3 is actually not such a great move, since it's giving white long-term weaknesses. h3 is also very common. And again, we are playing bishop h5, and after something like queen c2, we can simply play bishop g6. If he takes, we are taking back, and then our knight is developed through d7, our queen to c7, and we finish our development with very nice and healthy position for us. So, h3, as I said, is also possible, but probably the best move for white is to play queen to c2. And now I in general really like the move g6, since this is the smartest way to make this bishop on d3 as useless as possible. And also the pawn on g6 in generally is nice, because this knight is usually going to g3, and with the pawn on g6 we are also getting some squares away from that knight. So that means we are somehow making white pieces as worse, as bad as possible. So after the move g6, again, there is different options here for white. For instance, something like h3 is a possibility, and I don't have any issue at all taking on e2, especially after the move h3, since this is of course weakening the dark squares. After bishop take e2, bishop e2, and knight d7, you can easily continue by playing moves like f5, knight f6, queen c7, ideas like knight e4, ideas like doubling the rooks on the e-file, ideas like start running with the h pawn with a really healthy and nice position. In case of something like knight g3, you just finish your development. For instance, a move like knight d7, h3, you can just come back to e6, and now the idea is to place the pawn on f5 and then play something like queen c7. If white tried to play something like knight e4 before, you can just go back to e7, then push f5, and then come back to d6 with again a very healthy and nice position. Let's go back a bit, and by the way, if white plays bishop d2, you can just do the same. Bishop e6 and then play f5. Please don't play f5 here, because your bishop might get trapped after son f3, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So, as you can see, this is very simple, very easy, and as I mentioned, if you want to play knight d7 and followed by knight f8, or even knight b6 in some position, that's it also a possibility, but I personally prefer to play bishop g4. I think it's just easier, and I love the positions after bishop g4. Anyway, let's focus on the main move for white, which is the move queen to c2. After queen c2, I like start giving the check, because it's just gonna make our life much easier, and anyway our rook is gonna be placed there. And now white has two main moves, either bishop e3 or knight e2, being knight e2 the main one by far, but some people might try to play bishop e3 in order to castle as soon as possible. And now our plan is to play h5. I have to say something. In general, I know it looks like our pawn on h5 is gonna make white attack to come faster, but the truth is that if you place your pawn on g6, then you give a very easy plan for white to play with h4 and h5 at some position. This doesn't mean that g6 is a bad move. I just think playing h5 is a bit easier, and the positions are easier to understand, and that's why I'm gonna recommend this move. So, after the move h5, most people will simply try to long castle, and now our plan is very strong. We want to play knight to a6. The idea with knight a6 is that we want to get the d5 square after playing knight c7 and knight to d5. And there is something you should remember. In general, when you want to get the d5 square for your knight, you usually want this route, a6, c7. It's better than using the route d7 to b6. If you go to d7, it's usually to go to f8. And let me explain you why. Because if you play knight d7, let's imagine white plays, for instance, a move like king b1, and then you want to play knight b6. The issue here is that white is always going to be able to play c4, and you have no counterattack, and also c5 is also a threat. So you don't like your knight on b6 in general, because c4 tends to be very strong, and also your knight is not going anywhere else from b6. So usually you don't want to do this, okay? Especially if your opponent is castling long. The reason is because once you play knight a6, let's imagine your opponent plays king b1 anyway, and you go to c7. Now the main difference is that if your opponent tries to avoid knight d5 with the move c4, now you are able to play b5 and you start opening up the position. Of course, he can try to close, playing something like c5, but then after bishop f8, bishop e6, knight d5, you have really powerful a lot of activity. So please remember, anytime you want to bring your knight to d5, go through a6 and c7. Do not play knight d7 and knight b6, because otherwise you will get stuck after the move c4. That's very important to remember. And well, now after knight c7, actually c4 is not a good move because it's going to make our counterattack much faster. So something like knight f3 is normal, and now you can continue in knight d5. He will move the bishop, you play b5, bishop e6, and it's very easy to play this position with the black pieces. So yeah, that position in general is very simple. And now we'll continue with the move knight e2. The same goes for this position, and again, my recommendation will be the move h5. It's also possible to play g6, it's also possible to play h6, but my personal favorite by far is to play h5. And there is different reasons why I like to play h5. First of all, if your opponent is castling short, you will get a lot of counterplay, sometimes playing h4. So again, different possibilities. Some people like to play bishop e3 here. This way they stay flexible with the possibility of castling short or castling long. But let's start with the possibility of castling short here. So it's important to realize that after the move short castle, your opponent is actually kind of threatening knight g3, because if you play g6, bishop g6 will be crashing, and if you play h4, knight f5 might be a bit annoying. And that's the reason why you want to play h4 really fast in this position. After the move h4, you are also kind of threatening h3, trying to weaken the light square. So white in general is not very happy allowing this, okay? So let's say, for instance, white can play something like bishop e3, then you can go h3, and this is very nice. Something like g3, you go knight e7, knight f8, and this is like a long-term problem for white, and the pawn on h3 is not going to be weak, it's very easy to defend. So in general, white is not very happy allowing this, and that's why most people after the move h4 are going to play h3. Almost everybody plays h3, which of course also is a move that weakens the dark squares. Anyway, I'm going to show you a couple of more moves. For instance, knight f4 is a very interesting move, and it's also getting kind of popular, so it's important to pay attention here because it's one of the most aggressive moves that white can try in this situation. Now, one of the white ideas is to bring quickly the queen to h5, so we are gonna bring the knight very quickly to f8. Knight d7 is a good move, queen d1 is the main option and the main reason for this line to exist, and now we go knight f8 and queen h5. After queen h5, there is plenty of possibilities to play here with the black pieces. Move like queen c7, for instance, is completely fine. But I really like the line that I'm going to recommend because I believe is a bit more weird, so your opponent might not know it. And also, I think we can get a really, really strong counterplay after playing that. We are going to take on f4, we are going to give the pair of bishop, but we are going to get this. After h3, we are gonna get a lot of weaknesses in the light square, so we want to find some attack to our opponent position. After the move h3, there is two main moves, either g4 or gh3. G4 is very risky, of course, for the white pieces. And now what we want to do is we want to open up the whole position as soon as possible. And in order to do that, we are playing the move c5. c5 is very strong. Of course, dc5 is not possible because d3 is hanging. Also, queen c5, we can simply take on g4. Our position is very healthy. Our king is super safe. And this guy cannot say the same. Taking on h3, again, is not something that really annoys us. After cd4, the position is getting very open. It's coming here. We even have some queen d7, queen g4 ideas. And again, our king is very safe, and this guy is kind of more exposed. So this is, again, a very nice possibility for us. And the last move, and one of the more common moves here for white, is to play something like bishop c4. And we can simply go by knight e6, gaining a tempo. Of course, white can, white shouldn't give the bishop on e6 because this guy is the only guy defending the light squares. So if white decides to take after bishop takes e6, actually black have a huge advantage because of the weaknesses on the light squares. That's why bishop e3 will be something quite natural. And now we have a very funny continuation. cd4, cd4, and b5 is a really nice idea, and we actually are getting a lot of counterplay with the black pieces. If white decides to take with the bishop, knight d4 is actually completely crushing. Bishop e4, rook e4 is completely winning for us. And in case of queen b5, there is different options that are completely fine for us. a5 followed by bishop a6, completely fine. And also knight g5, trying to create some attack against the king, is really nice. Again, our king is very safe and we have a lot of counterplay. Anyway, it's quite weird you'll get a position so far. I just wanted to show a bit how the lines can continue, but actually I don't believe it's so important you remembering all of this because it's usually not going to happen. Also, there is more possibilities. I just want to show how the possibilities can go. Okay, g4, as I said, is not the most popular move. Gh3 is usually the most common move. And now, again, there is more than one possibility. Bishop e6, for instance, is completely fine here, but I really like the move queen to d7. So the idea with queen d7, one of them is, of course, just to take the pawn. Also, sometimes we want to play something like b6 followed by bishop b7, trying to get some counterplay. How can this position go? For instance, let's say rook f1. We can simply take on h3, and after queen h3 and bishop h3, we have really nice endgame because actually this is quite kind of weak and our position is very unstable without any kind of weakness. In case white is very greedy and he wants to keep all of the pawns alive, playing something like h4, we can actually play queen h3, and actually bishop g4 is coming, bishop f3 ideas, knight g6 ideas, and it's very, very risky for the white pieces. King g2 is also very common and one of the most played move. And now we can continue, for instance, with g6. White should move the queen, something like queen to f3 is normal. And now we can go knight e6, ideas knight g7, trying to find knight h5, or even b6, bishop b7. We've sacrificed a pawn, but our king is again very safe. White has a lot of weaknesses, and it's very simple to continue playing this position with the black pieces. So all of this is very nice. More possibilities here for white. As I said before, I don't think it's very important you remember all of this. I just want to show possibilities on how to play the position with the black pieces. But in general, white can play anything. No? White can play, let's say, a4, bishop d2, h3, whatever. And in general, the position remains the same. It's not like a super concrete position, but more like a position you should understand, know how to put the pieces, and know how the plans goes. So, for instance, something like bishop f4. Remember this. This is important, extremely important. Don't fall for this trap, okay? Remember this. Do not play rook e2 if your knight is not on f8. Why? Because after queen takes e2 and bishop f4, white will be winning with queen e4. The threat is queen take f4 or queen e7. So, if your knight is on f8 and your opponent plays on bishop f4, then you might consider rook e2 is going to be usually a good move. But if your knight is not on f8, do not fall for this trap, because otherwise you will be losing on the spot. I mean, you can play something like here, but then check, rook e1 is coming, and you are completely crushed here. So, very important to remember. After the move bishop f4, I really like to continue with knight a6. In general, you are just gonna keep developing the pieces. You should not really worry with some move like bishop a6, b6. I know the structure look a bit weird, but actually it's very nice and we have a lot of activity. Of course, white just gave us the light square bishop and we are threatening h3. So, well, some people might try to play h3, but of course rook e2 is working now because there is no bishop to make any threat on h7, so this will be losing on the spot. And in case bishop d6, you take on d6. Again, you are threatening h3. This is not something white should allow because then the light square will be too weak. And something like h3, you can continue simply with move like a5, continue with g6, bishop f5, or bishop a6, or some rook b8, a6 idea. As you can see, white is struggling a lot because the knight is in a very not nice position. He cannot go here, not here. Going to c1 is very slow, and otherwise kind of stuck on e2, which is a square where it's very, very exposed. So this is definitely not nice for white. Just to end, I wanted to mention h3 is the main move, of course, for the white pieces. And now you will just continue developing the pieces. Now you go with knight d7 and you want to play knight to f8 next. So again, I'm going to show you some possibilities on how the position can continue here. For instance, in case white plays f4 too quick, this is very common, especially when our knight is on f8, because sometimes white wants to play f5 and this way try to make our knight as, let's say, unuseful as possible. You should break the position with c5. This is very common and you want to break the position trying to create weaknesses, because now after f4 and also with the pawn h4, this guy is getting weak. And if the center and the whole position opens, the guy on g1 will actually suffer a lot. So after c5, there is two main common moves. Some people will try to play something like d5, which is actually a mistake. And now you can continue with very strong sacrifice. f5 is really good. And after bishop f5, knight f6 is very good. And suddenly all of your pieces are developing very quickly. This bishop is very hard to develop because e3 is control and d2 cannot be used because e2 is hanging. This guy is hanging. You have some 94 ideas after the bishop get changed. And actually this is already much better for black. So d5 is a very common mistake here. Something like bishop d2 can happen. Now you can use the fact that the knight is hanging to play f5. He cannot take because this will be hanging. And after something like bishop e1 and g6, again, you have a very nice position. You can continue with ideas like queen f6 or eventually some b6, bishop b7 to use the diagonal. And of course, another somehow common move will be to play something like king h1, and you again have this wonderful sacrifice. f5, take knight f6. This sacrifice is very common and you have a lot of concept play because, as I said, knight is kind of not going anywhere. White's struggling to develop the bishop and you have a lot of activity for just a pawn. This guy is very, very weak. By the way, it's also possible to play f5 followed by knight f6. Van Forest did this once and also won the game very convincingly, but I slightly prefer c5, but also f5 is completely fine. So in general, to play f4, white should prepare the position a bit because otherwise the development can get very tricky to finish for the white pieces. So one of the most common moves here is actually to play bishop d2. In general, when white play with bishop e2 and not bishop e3, they want to play f4 eventually. That's why they don't put the bishop on e3, because otherwise the bishop will be hanging. And that's the reason why we play here knight f8. And now, of course, white could try to play something like f4, but you already know a trick from the line I showed before. Now the knight is kind of hanging, solely defended by the bishop. And this means you can go f5. And once you go f5 and g6, there is no point behind f4. f4 is only a decent move if white is sure that they will manage to play f5 themselves. If we are able to stop with f5, this is just creating weaknesses for white, and it's not nice. Now, all the pieces are completely cramped, and white is kind of stuck, and they cannot easily develop the rest of their pieces, so this is very good for us. Rook a1, for instance, will be threatening f4 because we cannot really play f5 since they will be able to take. And that's the reason why we are playing here g6. For instance, bishop e6 wouldn't be that nice because f4 will be nice to continue with f5. This is a very common mistake, so please don't make it. The only thing you have to be careful is white trying to play this. And that's why, again, we play the move g6. And actually it's a move that I really like because a lot of people is not really familiar with the position and they will play f4 anyway. And after f5, the position is already nicer to play with the black pieces. A very common problem that white has to face in this kind of position is the knight, because as I said, on f4 is going to be easily attacked eventually. So a very common solution that many people give to this position is to play something like c4 and knight c3. And now, well, there is plenty of possibilities. I in generally like the idea to continue with bishop e6, and sometimes our plan is to go something like rook c8, bishop b8. We always have ideas with queen d6, queen h2, and also we keep the option to play with b5 completely open. And yeah, this is how your pieces go in general. Rook to c8, bishop to b8, b5 idea. This guy can also sometimes move to either f5 here, and playing this kind of situation. So that will go for bishop d2. Bishop f4, same thing as before. Please don't fall for this. You wouldn't be the first one. Many people fall for this. If you take queen e4 is coming, queen e7 is coming, bishop is hanging, you are completely lost. Don't fall for this trick, very important. Now you can easily play knight f8, and white could try to change the bishop, you take back, and again, this guy is suffering a lot. It's not easy to find a place for this guy, and you can easily gain some space, continuing with move like g6, f5, knight h7, knight f6, bishop d7, slightly improving your pieces with a very nice position. And just to end, bishop e3 is one of the most common moves, and you already know how to place your pieces. It's gonna be the same. It's super easy to play this position. Where does the knight go? To f8, very simple. Something like rook d1. You continue bishop e6, rook c8, ideas with bishop b8, with queen d6, it's on c4, ideas with b5. Okay, super easy. You will find also some model games in the model games section. c4, bishop e6, easy. Rook d1, rook c8, easy. Very simple. Why do you want the rook on c8? This sometimes can be a bit weird. The rook on c8 is useful for many reasons. First, d5 is much harder because the queen is on c2, so after cd5 you'll be annoying the queen. Second, you want to play bishop b8. If you do play bishop b8, usually you don't love your rook being on e8. It's not the end of the world, but it will be much nicer if your rook is on c8, because then it will be much more easy to use and to activate in some other file. If you play bishop b8 here, this guy will start complaining, and we don't like rooks complaining. And also because sometimes you want to play b5, and after takes you are also gaining a tempo. How can the position continue here? For instance, something like rook e1 will be natural. You have this bishop b8 idea, sometimes queen d6. Sometimes you can even play with g5, super aggressive, g5, king g7, knight g6, queen c7, trying to attack. Also, completely interesting possibility. Moves like knight f4. In general, you don't care so much if he takes your bishop, because then the dark square will be so weak, and you'll also have a lot of counterplay with this kind of queen c7 plan. So yeah, that will be an easy solution, just to play queen c7. And something like bishop f4, you can always trade. And for instance, queen e5 is a really nice activation. You want to find some queen g5, knight g6 ideas. So as you see, everything is very simple. The ideas remain the same, and it's super easy to play this position. And now I'm going to show you how the line can continue in case white actually wants to castle long. Okay, bishop e3 in general is aimed to castle long, although white is still able to castle short if they want. How are we placing our pieces? We're going to start by playing the move knight to d7. As you know, knight d7, usually want to go here. Not going to b6 after c4 makes our pieces to be completely stuck there. How can white continue here? Well, something like castle could happen easily. I mean, you can just play h4 here if you want, and you will likely transpose to the main line, but it's also possible to just play knight f8 here. The reason is that now playing knight g3 is not so good, because after h4, if white try to jump to f5 or something, we can actually go h3 and the bishop is defended, which is something that doesn't happen when you play knight d7 in the other position. Okay, that's the main difference, and that's why this is completely fine. And well, and this basically goes the same as before. Okay, something like rook a1. You can play h4 if you wish. You can play, for instance, bishop g4. I like bishop g4. I like this spin because in general white will play h3, and then all this will be much weaker. So something like h3, you can take, and you can play g6. Place pawn on e5, queen on c7. Go here. Super easy to play. Super nice. And well, the same for all the other kind of moves. Okay, so you don't really have to worry a lot about your castle. You already are an expert on how to play those positions. So long castle, of course, is the main move here. but I also wanted to briefly mention how to play against the move knight g3. As I mentioned before, this is the moment where when you have played knight d7, you should not play h4 because after knight f5 he's attacking too many things. That's why we don't play h4 here. And now there is an exception to the rule. We're actually playing knight to b6. But it's super concrete and you will actually understand the idea. Of course, we want to continue with knight d5. So white shouldn't allow this. I mean, something like knight h5, knight d5 is super nice. The line could continue something like this. So castle, bishop d4 is nice, gaining a tempo, knight g3. There is plenty of solutions. This is just the easiest. And then you take back the pawn and your king is safer, so it's a very nice position. Anyway, knight h5 is not going to happen usually. c4 is very common, and now a lovely move, very nice, very unexpected. f5, going of course to play f4 next. Now white should be super careful. c5, bishop g3 is really bad because now knight d5 is coming. So more possibilities. Knight e2 coming back. This is a bit sad. After check, white cannot play knight c3 because f4 is winning, and something like king f1, you can just go g6 and position is really good for you. And that's why knight f5 is actually the main solution that usually people goes by. And now again a very nice trick. Boom, knight takes c4. The idea is that white cannot really take back. I mean, they can, but you can simply take, and if he takes check and take on f5 with a much better position, and after something like knight d6, you are able to take on e3, check, you can simply go to f8, he has to take, you take back, and your position again is completely fine. Actually, I would rather take black here. And there is not so much more you should no. Anyway, knight g3 is a quite weird move here. Most people goes with the move long castle, and now we'll play knight f8. And here we have different kind of positions. Some ideas remain similar, some ideas are different. Okay, how to play this with the black pieces? Main ideas for black. You want to place your guy here, you want to create some attack here, and then sometimes you will play some b5. Then knight on f8, what do you do with it? Sometimes you play knight g6, and actually this goes for many lines. In general, you can play knight g6, and you don't care if he's taking on g6, because then you will have so much compensation on the light squares that you don't really care so much, okay? What if white tried to play something like h3, g4? You just play h4 and you close the position. For instance, h3, you can play bishop e6, g4, do not take. If you take, bad news, rook happy. We don't like this. So in general, you will just close with h4, and this is the way you usually stop a white attack. Okay, this is very important to remember. Do not take ever on g4. You play h4, you close the position. So I'm gonna show you some of the main moves and some of the main alternatives on how the position can go. Okay, for instance, knight g3. What happens if he goes for something like knight g3? We could play h4, but actually it's very nice to play g6. You already know I love to play g6 when the knight is here, and the knight is not very helpful on g3 because he's stopping the g pawn, and in general white will eventually like to play g4. Otherwise, it's very hard to attack with the white pieces. So knight g3 is just gonna be very, very slow. So not a nice move. And by the way, if he plays knight e4, we don't really care so much. We can just play bishop e7 and continue with bishop e6 ideas. More possibilities, something like c4, for instance, which is very common to continue ideas with knight c3. How do you place your pieces? Bishop goes here, something like knight c3. How to continue here? There is plenty of possibilities. Move like rook c8 is fine. Move like bishop b4 is fine. I personally love to play with this knight g6 idea. As I mentioned, the pawn sacrifice is almost always very good for black. And when I mean the pawn sacrifice, of course, in this position, taking doesn't make any sense because also c4 is hanging. But let's forget about c4 for a second, and let's imagine I'm playing bishop f7 and he's playing queen d3, okay? This is good for black almost every time. Okay, I don't mean about this position, but in general this idea. Why? Because this guy is good. He's defending here, he's attacking here. You have b5 ideas in order to open at the diagonal. Your king is super safe, and this diagonal is also super weak. So don't be worried if you lose the pawn like this. You will almost every time have a ton of compensation. Of course, you can take c4 here, which is better. But what I want to tell you, it's not so important, the c4 pawn. Just having the bishop is enough for compensation, okay? So in general, you should not be worried about this. And also now we want to jump on f4, so we'll have a really nice position. More options. King b1, which by the way is the main move for the white pieces. Very easy. Bishop goes to e6. How can white continue here? For instance, move like h3, trying to create counterattack. What do you play? b5, common move. g4, you already know what to do. h4, closing. Then ideas. Queen e5 ideas. Then queen c7 to find c5 ideas. Very nice, very easy to play. More options. Knight f4, very common move. By the way, mistake already. Black position will be better. You take here and you play b5, trying to stop c4. Ideas. Queen d5, a4, a5, trying to make this diagonal as long as possible. Attacking here, knight g6 sometimes. Very simple. Something like c4. You can go rook c8 with the same ideas of trying to find some b5. And after, for instance, move like knight c3, you can again go knight g6. With knight g6, sometimes you are aiming to play knight f4, sometimes you are aiming to play knight e7, g6, and knight f5, okay? Something like a3, which is also a possibility. Again, you can go knight g6 here. Never be worried about this. Many reasons. You can take here, you can play bishop f7, or even queen d7 is completely winning this position. So, knowing this, you are already an expert on the classical variation with knight f6. Anyway, next chapter, we are going to check the secondary lines in this knight f6 variation. I hope you enjoyed the chapter and see you in the next one.
Access ChessEnigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.